Section 55 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Book the Fourth, Chapter 3, continued. At the moment when I left my chair there was a sharp double knock at the street door. Mrs. Oldershaw evidently recognized it. She rose in a violent hurry and rang the bell. "I am too unwell to see anybody," she said, when the servant appeared. "Wait a moment, if you please," she added, turning sharply on me, when the woman had left us to answer the door. It was small, very small, spitefulness on my part, I know, but the satisfaction of thwarting Mother Jezebel, even in a trifle, was not to be resisted. "I can't wait," I said. "You reminded me just now that I ought to be at church." Before she could answer, I was out of the room. As I put my foot on the first stair, the street door was opened, and a man's voice inquired whether Mrs. Oldershaw was at home. I instantly recognized the voice. Dr. Downward. The doctor repeated the servant's message in a tone which betrayed unmistakable irritation at finding himself admitted no further than the door. "Your mistress is not well enough to see visitors? Give her that card," said the doctor, "and say I expect her, the next time I call, to be well enough to see me." If his voice had not told me plainly that he felt in no friendly mood toward Mrs. Oldershaw, I dare say I should have let him go without claiming his acquaintance. But as things were, I felt an impulse to speak to him or to anybody who had a grudge against Mother Jezebel. There was more of my small spitefulness in this, I suppose. Anyway, I slipped downstairs, and, following the doctor out quietly, overtook him in the street. I had recognized his voice, and I recognized his back as I walked behind him. But when I called him by his name, and when he turned around with a start and confronted me, I followed his example and started on my side. The doctor's face was transformed into the face of a perfect stranger. His baldness had hidden itself under an artfully grizzled wig. He had allowed his whiskers to grow, and had dyed them to match his new head of hair. Hideous circular spectacles bestrode his nose in place of the neat double eyeglass that he used to carry in his hand, and a black neckerchief, surmounted by immense shirt collars, appeared as the unworthy successor of the clerical white cravat of former times. Nothing remained of the man I once knew but the comfortable plumpness of his figure, and the confidential courtesy and smoothness of his manner and his voice. "Charmed to see you again," said the doctor, looking about him a little anxiously, and producing his card-case in a very precipitate manner. "But, my dear Miss Gwilt, permit me to rectify a slight mistake on your part. Dr. Downward of Pimlico is dead and buried, and you will infinitely oblige me if you will never, on any consideration, mention him again." I took the card he offered me, and discovered that I was now supposed to be speaking to Dr. Ledoux, of the Sanitarium, Fairweather Vale, Hampstead. "You seem to have found it necessary," I said, "to change a great many things since I last saw you. Your name, your residence, your personal appearance." "And my branch of practice," interposed the doctor. "I have purchased of the original possessor, a person of feeble enterprise and no resources, a name, a diploma, and a partially completed sanitarium for the reception of nervous invalids. We are open already to the inspection of a few privileged friends. Come and see us. Are you walking my way? Pray take my arm, and tell me to what happy chance I am indebted for the pleasure of seeing you again." I told him the circumstances, exactly as they had happened, and I added, with a view to making sure of his relations with his former ally at Pimlico, that I had been greatly surprised to hear Mrs. Oldershaw's door shut on such an old friend as himself. Cautious as he was, the doctor's manner of receiving my remark satisfied me at once that my suspicions of an estrangement were well founded. His smile vanished, and he settled his hideous spectacles irritably on the bridge of his nose. "Pardon me if I leave you to draw your own conclusions," he said. "The subject of Mrs. Oldershaw is, I regret to say, far from agreeable to me under existing circumstances. A business difficulty connected with our late partnership at Pimlico, entirely without interest for a young and brilliant woman like yourself. Tell me your news. Have you left your situation at Thorpe Ambrose? Are you residing in London? Is there anything, professional or otherwise, that I can do for you?" That last question was a more important one than he supposed. Before I answered it, I felt the necessity of parting company with him, and of getting a little time to think. "You have kindly asked me, doctor, to pay you a visit," I said. "In your quiet house at Hampstead, I may possibly have something to say to you which I can't say in this noisy street. When are you at home at the sanitarium? Should I find you there later in the day?" The doctor assured me that he was then on his way back, and begged that I would but name my own hour. I said, "Toward the afternoon," and, pleading an engagement, hailed the first omnibus that passed us. "Don't forget the address," said the doctor, as he handed me in. "I have got your card," I answered, and so we parted. I returned to the hotel and went up to my room, and thought it over very anxiously. The serious obstacle of the signature on the marriage register still stood in my way as unmanageably as ever. All hope of getting assistance from Mrs. Oldershaw was at an end. I could only regard her henceforth as an enemy hidden in the dark, the enemy, beyond all doubt now, who had me followed and watched when I was last in London. To what other counselor could I turn for the advice which my unlucky ignorance of law and business obliged me to seek from some one more experienced than myself? Could I go to the lawyer whom I consulted when I was about to marry Midwinter in my maiden name? Impossible, to say nothing of his cold reception of me when I had last seen him. The advice I wanted this time related, disguise the facts as I might, to commission of a fraud of the sort that no prosperous lawyer would consent to assist if he had a character to lose. Was there any other competent person I could think of? There was one, and one only, the doctor who had died at Pimlico and had revived again at Hampstead. I knew him to be entirely without scruples, to have the business experience that I wanted myself, and to be as cunning, as clever, and as far-seeing a man as could be found in all London. Beyond this, I had made two important discoveries in connection with him that morning. In the first place, he was on bad terms with Mrs. Oldershaw, which would protect me from all danger of the two leaguing together against me if I trusted him. In the second place, circumstances still obliged him to keep his identity carefully disguised, which gave me a hold over him in no respect inferior to any hold that I might give him over me. In every way he was the right man, the only man, for my purpose, and yet I hesitated at going to him, hesitated for a full hour and more, without knowing why. It was 2 o'clock before I finally decided on paying the doctor a visit, having, after this, occupied nearly another hour in determining to a hairbreadth how far I should take him into my confidence. I sent for a cab at last, and set off toward 3 in the afternoon for Hampstead. I found the sanitarium with some little difficulty. Fairweather Vale proved to be a new neighborhood, situated below the high ground of Hampstead, on the southern side. The day was overcast, and the place looked very dreary. We approached it by a new road running between trees, which might once have been the park avenue of a country house. At the end we came upon a wilderness of open ground, with half-finished villas dotted about, and a hideous litter of boards, wheelbarrows, and building materials of all sorts scattered in every direction. At one corner of this scene of desolation stood a great, overgrown, dismal house, plastered with drab-colored stucco, and surrounded by a naked, unfinished garden, without a shrub or a flower in it, frightful to behold. On the open iron gate that led into this enclosure was a new brass plate, with "Sanitarium" inscribed on it in great black letters. The bell, when the cabman rang it, pealed through the empty house like a knell,